it is time for my latest Dark Side of the Ring episode review, and before I jump into that, a couple of video updates. Number one, the Thundercats video. I tried to post it earlier this week. It is done. It's in the can. But when I tried to post it, YouTube immediately blocked it, even though I opted to not have it monetized. Apparently the clips I used were too much, and maybe I went a little too far, and they wouldn't allow it to be posted. So I thought maybe I could list it as private and then just let those that want to see it see it. That didn't work either. So I'm thinking, all right, because I don't want to get rid of it, because I did spend several weeks working on that thing. So I'm probably gonna find a way to post it somewhere and then just give you guys the link, either both on Twitter and here on the YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. I will find a way to get that thing posted and get somebody to see it, because it's like, oh, come on, man, be cool. Be cool, YouTube. I'm still pissed at YouTube for what they did to me in my last live stream, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. So yeah, moving right along, other video updates. Next week, I plan to get my next Star Wars book review up. Starting that back up again, although not as a regular thing. They'll be infrequent, but I do have one lined up. You'll be seeing that next week. And also my next WCW Nitro retrospective will be up next week as well. And that one will cover the evolution of the NWO from Scott Hall's debut all the way to the end of December 1996. So a lot of good stuff there, and I'm really excited to talk about that stuff, because I think a lot of us have a lot of fond memories of that particular era of Monday Nitro, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So got those in the can. But now it is time for another Dark Side of the Ring episode review. This week's episode focused on Herb Abrams and the UWF. Now, to be perfectly honest, the story of the UWF is not that interesting. It's one of several failed attempts at a wrestling promotion. We've seen a lot of them come and go. I mean, you'll never see, I highly doubt you'll ever see a documentary on the AWF, for those of you that remember that. And I've never actually watched a UWF show, and when I say UWF, I mean the Herb Abrams UWF, obviously, not the Bill Watts UWF from the 80s. But I've never actually watched one of their shows, but I've seen clips of it, and it looks low rent. It looks, it's funny, the footage they used in the episode, I was looking at it, it's like, man, this came from the 90s? This looks at least a decade older than the 1990s. It's just very low rent, very low production. And, a lot of the pitfalls that a lot of wrestling companies fall into. It's like, oh, we got the big name stars. We got Jimmy Snuka. We got Bruno Sammartino. We got Andre the Giant until Vince pulled him away. Let it never be said that Vince McMahon will not fuck somebody over to prevent competition from stepping up in his face. It's one of those things when people say that NXT going to USA on Wednesday nights was not done to fuck with AEW. It's like, yes, it was. I'm like, don't even... Dude, if AEW had gone to Tuesdays, fucking NXT would have been on Tuesdays. Like, I believe that in my heart and soul. Vince, he doesn't like competition. I've heard people say that he does. I'm like, I don't think he does. I think he would just like it if every other wrestling company just shut their doors and let him be the King Emperor of everything that is wrestling. He'd love to own all the feds in New Japan and in the UK and everywhere else. It's just, that's Vince. But anyway, by the way, another quick sidebar. Money in the Bank. I have not been watching Raw or SmackDown at all, not since around WrestleMania time. However, the Money in the Bank ladder match, or, well, not really a ladder match, the corporate ladder match intrigues me. And I'm kind of like, okay, I kind of want to see how that plays out, because it sounds like Die Hard, the match, and I'm like, okay, it's probably going to be super fucking stupid, but I kind of want to see it, because at this point with these empty arena shows, I'm like, dude, I will take bombastic stupidity at this point, and that at least sounds intriguing, so I am going to check that out. But anyway, getting back to Herb Abrams, the UWF itself, I don't find to be that interesting, except for the fact that it got some big names, and Cactus Jack was there, so they had a couple of future stars there as well. The cookie thing, the weird thing about the cookies, I would have bought those cookies in a heartbeat, because I love oatmeal cookies, and even as a kid, I loved oatmeal cookies. And I'm like, shit, fuck yeah, I'll buy oatmeal cookies with wrestlers' names on them. The problem is oatmeal cookies are like an old person cookie. I was a weird kid that oatmeal raisin was my favorite cookie. That and Oreos. I mean, Oreos are classic. But, oatmeal raisin, I mean, that's an old people cookie. And I don't know why it got that designation. I think oatmeal raisin cookies are delicious, and people that don't like them are insane. But I do not represent the majority. So the fact that they would try to market oatmeal cookies to the wrestling audience, which is largely kids at that point, I'm like, what kid is going to ask their mom to get oatmeal cookies with wrestlers on them? The Herbie cookies. And especially, who's going to buy cookies with the promoter on it? It's like, dude, if I'm going to get the things, I'm going to get the Dr. Death ones, the Paul Orndorff ones, and all of that stuff. I'm not getting the one with Herb Abrams' face on it. It's like, come on, that's crazy. Yeah, a couple oddities there. But again, the story of the promotion itself, maybe not that interesting. Maybe a couple lessons to be learned from future wrestling companies that don't want to repeat the same mistakes. What is interesting about the UWF, though, aside from the cookies, is the promoter Herb Abrams, who I think is an excellent subject for a show like this. Just because he's like a kooky, weird lunatic. And just indicative of the type of person that pro wrestling attracts. I mean, pro wrestling is this weird magnet for just psychotic, crazy people. And Herb Abrams in that aspect, Herb Abrams fit the wrestling business like a glove. He is a character. He was a wild man. He had passion, and he fit the professional wrestling business more than I would, or most normal people would. He's like, in this weird way, well, for one thing, he was kind of a trailblazer in that he was, as far as I know, he was the first one that really took the promoter role and made it an on-air character. Before Eric Bischoff did it, before Vince McMahon did it. Herb Abrams, as far as I know, he was like the first one to really do that, because before that, authority figures had always been somebody that they just put out there, like a Jack Tunney, who didn't really have any authority at all. It was just a part that had to be filled on the show. So that's interesting, but he's basically, he's kind of like, he's got like the passion and energy of a Paul Heyman, and like kind of that grab him by the throat attitude of a Vince McMahon, but with none of the talent or the know-how to actually make the wrestling promotion work. And certainly didn't possess their restraint. Vince and Paul had to be the captain of the ship. And if the captain of the ship is snorting cocaine and doing God knows what with hookers every single night, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. And your company's going to lack stability. And, he's supposed to be the visionary of the company, and, booking was atrocious for that show. Perfect example of they didn't have somebody to kind of give the show a direction, keep the wrestlers in line, gave the wrestlers way too much creative freedom, and what you got was just kind of like a free-for-all. Not even like a bombastically silly free-for-all like WCW got in like 2000 or something like that. It was just kind of a dull show with some big names on it, but it was just kind of a dull, flat show with no real identity, because they didn't really build anything, they didn't really do anything. It was just kind of like, here we are, we're putting on matches with these people that and that's about it. And so Herb Abrams, in some ways, like I said, he's got the energy for wrestling. Even a little bit, I mean, that promo he cut with a bloody face, I mean, that was pretty good. Maybe as an on-air character, there's some gold to mine there, but as the creative visionary behind a wrestling company, I don't think he really knew what he was doing, and, his vices clearly got in the way. But what I was looking forward to in this episode were a bunch of goofy Herb Abrams stories. And that's pretty much all I wanted out of this. And I got it. And it was like the one where he's with two hookers and he's naked. And, somebody busts down the door asking for money and he jumps out the window. I'm like, yeah, that's the type of thing I tuned in to see. That type of wacky story. The fact that he died and nobody knows exactly how he died and there's like 10 different stories of how he died, that's great. And stuff like that is hilarious to me, where it's like, man, this guy was like the Tasmanian devil in real life, and just he was so crazy that any one of those stories about how he potentially died sounded plausible, except for the one where he's like, oh, he actually faked his death to go, tax evasion or something like that. Because I think Mick Foley brought up, there is no way in holy hell that Herb Abrams could have stayed hidden for 30 years. There's no way. He's too crazy. Mick Foley was great in this thing, by the way. And actually, a lot of the people they brought in, B. Brian Blair, and people that worked closely with Herb in the UWF, what really impressed me was how Herb was actually able to connect with some of these people. And I was like, wow, he wasn't just like a heartless lunatic that had all the passion, but no real care for the talent or the people that made the show. He was just a wild man that let his vices get in the way of being able to put on a good show. But he actually did connect with the people that he worked with. And that was actually very interesting to see. And, people were crying when they find out that he had died. And even talking on this documentary, all these years later, they were still, like, getting choked up talking about him. And it's like, and that's really fascinating. It really paints a different picture of her that maybe a lot of us fans who knew the story and had heard stories about him for years, paints a little bit of a different picture than what we had known before. And Mick Foley, who, again, was great in this, I loved what he said at the end. What do you think Herb would be doing if he was still alive? Time. He wouldn't hurt anybody, but he would have tax cheated something, or like there's no way he would have gotten off scot-free forever. But I'd visit him in the jail, and I'd toast him with a glass of milk and some Herbie cookies. And I'm like, that is such a great Mick Foley answer. He's such a good-hearted guy. And Foley's one of the few guys I've heard say nice things about Vince Russo, even, like, fairly recent. So, Mick's a good dude. I'll just say that. Mick is a really, really good dude. And I thought this episode, for a topic that isn't as interesting as some of the other topics that were covered, and nowhere near as good as last week's about Dr. D. David Schultz. But I think as a showcase for this really funny, oddball character that tried to run a wrestling show, I think it succeeded in presenting that character. And that's what Herb Abrams was. He was a wrestling gimmick in real life. And by all indications, if assuming these stories are all true, the documentary was a solid representation of him, and it certainly matches up with the stories I'd heard previously about him. And again, if he had been more of a straight-laced guy, and if he had been like a more normal person, like let's say a Dixie Carter, like let's say if he was like someone with like the temperament and demeanor of someone like a Dixie Carter, this documentary wouldn't be worth it. It would just be, oh, there's another failed wrestling company. But the fact that he was so crazy made this a lot of fun to watch. And I'll say this, probably the best reenactments, the little reenactment segments that they do, this one was probably had the best of those, because as they're telling these stories, I have a visual in my head of what it would look like if Herb Abrams was running from pimps and jumping out a window and covered in baby oil and cocaine. And then they actually had the balls to show it. And it's right up there with, like, New Jack at 80 years old in a wheelchair snorting cocaine, or all the other wacky ones that they've done that are representations of stuff that didn't happen, but representations of stuff that people said during the interviews. And whenever they do something like that, I think it's really, really cool. And this one was just loaded with them, and it was hilarious. I thought it was a hoot. So I think this one was probably the best comedy episode of the bunch, even though there is that element of tragedy that Herb died, and a lot of people were broken up about it, the people that knew him the best. And it was, again, that part of it was really interesting for me, where it's like people really didn't have, the people that were interviewed for this thing, obviously, didn't have ill will towards him, and they saw good in him, and they got along with him, and they were able to get very close with him, and that was like that was actually good to see. So a little bit of heart in there, but plenty of laughs as well. This show did not make me any more interested to watch UWF material. I've never watched any of the UWF shows. I know, again, I've heard the stories, but I've never actually watched any of them. This episode didn't make me any more interested in checking it out. Unlike the New Jack episode, where when I saw his Smoky Mountain stuff, I was like, oh shit, I kind of want to watch that, because that's great. That stuff is great. There was nothing like that, and nothing that made me want to go, ooh, I should go, there's some hidden gems here, I should go check out the UWF, nothing like that. But again, I had fun watching it, just to observe the madness that was Herb Abrams. So, really fun episode this week. Season 2 continues to truck along. We've got 2 more episodes before the end of the season. The Road Warriors, and the one that I am really interested in seeing, Owen Hart. And I'm really curious to see how that one goes out. I think it's an excellent one for the season finale. Maybe even series finale, because I'm trying to think, like, what else could they possibly do? For if they came back for season 3, what else could they possibly do? But that's up to the producers. They can worry about that. So that is all I have for you now. Hope you all enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you all again next week for the next one.